He was just mopping the floor when the company's CEO shouted at him, publicly and without cause. Martin Grayson, confident in his power, never stopped to think who he was trying to break. But George Miller had something no one could take away: dignity, silence, and a recording that would change everything. And just wait until you hear the shocking twist in this story and how justice, in the end, finally prevailed. It was just another Friday morning at Hamilton and Royce, one of those firms where glass walls weren't about transparency, but about status. Everything was deliberate here. Coffee machines worth $2,000, walls in soft neutral tones, lighting designed to be flattering yet distant, carpets that muted footsteps, and people who muted their emotions. At exactly 8:47 a.m., Martin Grayson, the CEO himself, walked through the office. Tall, polished, every strand of silver hair in place, his eyes sharp like an auditor scanning for missing signatures. He was on the phone, speaking fast, confidently, loudly. He moved with purpose, as always. Employees slowed down, stepped aside, made space. And then, at the turn near one of the conference rooms, he suddenly stumbled. A sharp click of a shoe, a sliding step, metal clanked, water splashed. Martin spun around. Standing in front of him was a janitor, an older man in a neat gray uniform, a mop in his hands. Next to him, a bucket, with a bit of water now spilled on the floor, leaving a faint, damp streak. Martin straightened and raised his voice, sharp, without a second of pause. "Do you even look where you're putting your stuff?" His voice echoed off the glass walls. He didn't ask if he was okay. He didn't check if he himself had slipped. He didn't apologize. He blamed, immediately, publicly. George Miller, the janitor, said nothing. He was about 60, skin darkened by years under the sun, hands rough from labor. He simply lowered his eyes, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and leaned down to lift the bucket. His movements were slow, steady, as if he already knew what was coming next. But Grayson didn't stop. "You're here to mop floors, not to trip executives. Got that?" he said, voice raised, drawn out for effect. Then, with cold disdain, "If it weren't for that mop, you'd be out of work, so maybe be grateful you're even getting paid." The office froze. Someone with a coffee mug paused mid-sip. Another person quickly turned away, and someone, subtly, reached for their phone and tapped record. In this office, people didn't interfere, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how. Grayson's outbursts weren't unheard of. They usually happen behind closed doors, sharp emails, raised voices in elevators. But now, this was happening in the open, in front of everyone. And George? He didn't defend himself, didn't argue, didn't walk away. He just went back to wiping the floor, quietly, without looking up, as if nothing had been said, as if he knew anything he said right now would be used against him. And in that silence, surrounded by glass, steel, and machine-brewed coffee, something cracked. Kayla Henderson, junior legal assistant, stood by the printer watching him. George had once helped her find her lost keys. He made tea in the break room when he saw she looked tired. For the first time, she felt shame, not for George, but for herself. Because she said nothing, just like everyone else. The next morning, the office felt different. Not the usual quiet of people focused on spreadsheets and meetings. It was a heavier kind of silence, the kind that tells you something's missing. Or rather, someone. George was gone. He wasn't at the front lobby, where he was usually the first to say good morning. He wasn't on the stairwell, where his cart always made the same familiar clatter with one squeaky wheel. He wasn't in the break room, where he'd sometimes wipe down the tables and quietly refill the tea box when no one was looking. He was just gone, as if someone had torn out a page from a book, a page people used to skim without thinking, and now couldn't stop searching for. Later that morning, HR sent out a message. "We inform you that George Miller has submitted a resignation letter. No reason was provided." The email was brief, dry, almost clinical, but in the minds of many employees, the same thought echoed. Why? And more painfully, why didn't anyone stop it? Kayla Henderson, the young assistant who used to get coffee at the same time as George, couldn't focus. They used to exchange a few words each morning about the weather, traffic, or a show she was watching. Once, he brought her honey for tea when she had a sore throat. She thought it was sweet and forgot. Now she remembered everything, every gesture, every word, every pause, and the silence he kept the day before when he was yelled at in front of everyone. She began to ask around, quietly, carefully, and slowly a bigger picture began to form. George was raising his grandson alone. His wife had passed a few years ago. His daughter had left, leaving the child in his care. He never complained, never asked for help or special treatment. He worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7. He was always there, not because he had to be, but because he believed that if he didn't mop the floors, no one would. If he didn't help with a stuck printer or offer a kind word on someone's bad day, no one would notice. And he was okay with that. Only now, everyone else finally noticed. The video of the CEO yelling at him went viral. It started in the internal office chats. No caption, no commentary, just the clip. People watched it, and something twisted in their chest. For some, it was anger. For others, shame. For all, it was a deep sense that something important had just happened. Why didn't anyone stand by George? Why did he leave in silence? The same silence he had lived in all this time. Why did it take him disappearing for people to finally talk about him? Sometimes, a person can be around for years, and no one truly sees them. And then, one day, they're gone. And you realize the office didn't just run on contracts, deadlines, and reports. It ran, quietly, dependably, on one man who was always there. A week passed. The office carried on as if nothing had happened. Meetings, deals, coffee, calls, new clients. But the air was heavier than usual. It lingered. Even the most detached employees could feel it. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't finished. And then, one morning, a stack of fresh newspapers appeared at the front desk. Across the front page, bold and impossible to ignore, was the headline, "CEO abuses longtime black janitor, here's what happened next." The Atlanta Tribune. Beneath it, a photo of the Hamilton and Royce building at sunset. And under that, a story. George Miller's story. A quiet man, a steady presence. A janitor who had served the company with integrity and humility for over 15 years. A story where there were no titles, just human dignity. No dramatic speeches, only a silence that spoke louder than anything else. It turned out that Kayla Henderson, the young legal assistant, couldn't stay silent. She had shown the video to her mother, an investigative journalist at a local paper. And her mother, with professionalism, care, and precision, told the whole truth. Not just the moment of yelling, but the culture of indifference. The system that trained people to stay quiet. And the single moment that broke through it all. First, the story spread on social media. Hundreds of comments, thousands of views. Emails, reposts, private conversations across departments. Then other outlets picked it up. Inquiries poured in. Questions were asked. Attention grew. Hamilton and Royce was no longer just a firm. It was a case study, a mirror held up to every office that had ever looked away. That's when the real change began. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. They knew a statement wouldn't be enough. Not a corporate one, a human one, a real one. They also knew the company was on the edge of a reputational collapse. And they knew one man could no longer be its face. Martin Grayson submitted his resignation, officially for personal reasons. But everyone knew this wasn't just media pressure. It was something deeper. For the first time in years, corporate policy had stepped aside to make room for human ethics. And then, something happened that no one expected. An internal announcement went out. George Miller is returning to the company. Not as a janitor, not as a token, but as the honorary advisor for corporate culture and equity. At his welcome meeting, held in the very room where sales trainings and policy briefings were usually held, George stood at the microphone. In his usual gray shirt, no special suit, no prepared speech. He spoke softly, calmly, and with extraordinary clarity. "I'm not coming back to judge anyone. I'm coming back to remind us all, respect isn't written in a job description. It's in every choice we make. And if I can help prevent just one more person from going through what I did, then I have to stay." The room was silent. That same silence that used to go unnoticed. Now it meant something. Now it sounded like a standing ovation. George never became a media hero. He didn't receive awards. He didn't sign TV deals. He didn't become the face of protests or campaigns. He turned down anything that would turn him into someone he wasn't. He simply stayed true to himself. The same man who used to be the first to arrive at the building every morning, who never raised his voice, even when others shouted at him, who didn't work for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. After everything that happened at Hamilton and Royce, much changed, but not with slogans or flashy PR statements. The change came in the small things, in the air, in the people. At the entrance, where the company's mission statement used to hang, a new quote had taken its place. "Respect is not about title, it's about truth." George had written that line in a report after his first month back. He hadn't insisted on it, he simply left it there, and someone on the team decided this is where the new chapter begins. From that moment on, every new employee went through a different kind of orientation, not about policies, but about the culture of respect, a course designed by George. He didn't lecture about corporate ethics. He shared stories about people, about choices, about how important it is to see, not just to look. In his spare time, George became a guest lecturer at the local community college. His topic, the dignity of labor. He told students that there are no big or small jobs, there are just people, and the way we choose to treat them. He never once mentioned the former CEO's name with blame. He never sought revenge. He never pointed fingers. And when Martin Grayson was asked in an interview whether he regretted what had happened, he paused for a long moment, then quietly said, "I didn't just yell at George. I yelled at myself, because in that moment, I didn't lose respect for him. I lost respect for me, and he gave me back my humanity through his silence." Sometimes we think strength is in speaking loudly, that leadership is about bold decisions, that influence lives in corner offices. But some people simply do their job, quietly, honestly, consistently, and it is they who hold the world together. The moral? Sometimes the loudest voice is silence. The silence of someone who keeps their dignity, even when others lose theirs. The silence of someone who forgives while others lash out. The silence that speaks louder than any words ever could. And when you feel like you're standing at the top, pause, look around, because it's the people at the bottom who decide every day whether you deserve to stay there.